The cloud. Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Contrarians. This is a Patreon suggested topic and one that I was really excited to see come up. We're going to be looking at our top three Glenn Hughes projects, and there are a lot of them. We're talking about a man whose career covers 56 years, starting in 1968. My personal collection includes 30 albums on which Glenn is the primary singer, and I don't know how many where he sings backup vocals. So hopefully we're going to get a wide variety of music in the choices today. Everybody, we're just going to go around the horn, give all three of your picks at once, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with a closing discussion and comments at the end. And we're going to start as I see them on my screen. So David, that means you. Welcome to the Contrarians today. David, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. You're up, sir. Give us your top three Glenn Hughes.
Okay, yeah, this was a tough assignment for me. He's done so many great albums. So I just I don't know if I necessarily picked the best. I just picked maybe the three that I listen to the most often. So, yeah, my first one is going to be Medusa from Trapeze. I really like this album. I mean, it came out in 1970, but it's always felt like it's kind of rooted in that late 60s rock sound still. And John Lodge, he's listed as the producer on the album. I think he does a pretty solid job, but it seems like there's very minimal production on it. I mean, it just sounds like all three guys got in the room and just kind of cranked it out. I really like Jury is a good song. I like Black Cloud, and obviously the title track is good. But I know they re-recorded the title track with the first Black Country Communion album, which definitely gets a bigger sound out of it. But yeah, I mean, I think Glenn was only 19 years old when they recorded this album. I think for being that young, he does a really good job singing. And Mel Galley's guitar parts are memorable. He does a lot of cool soloing on here. And yeah, so that's my number three. And then my number two is Addiction from 1996. I always like that. I think Glenn really he got sober in the early 90s. And I think on this album, he really kind of addressed his addiction head on in the lyrics and the way he sings. Like The Death of Me was the first song on the album. I really think that was a really good opener. I mean, the music, it definitely sounds like an early 90s or mid 90s hard rock album, but I think his voice and the way as passionate as he is about the material, he kind of transcends the style a little bit. So, and then he closes out the album with I Don't Want to Live That Way Again, which is an 8-minute song. And I feel like that was him kind of like closing the chapter on his drug addiction and kind of like moving on, because his next album in 99, he kind of took a lighter tone. So I feel like he was kind of just like closing out, and he even had Ronnie Montrose played slide guitar on Justified Man on this album, which is kind of cool. So yeah, that's my number two. And then my number one is the Seventh Star from Black Sabbath. I know it's technically shouldn't have been a Black Sabbath album, and I think when Glenn recorded it, I don't think he approached the music that way. I mean, he sounds very soulful on this album. And I remember I interviewed Glenn once when his book came out back in 2011, and we talked about the recording of the album. And he said he had a great time, but he spent most of it at the bar. So it always amazed me how well he sang on this album, given how much drama he was going through personally with the addictions and the cocaine and everything. And I mean, I think Danger Zone is a great riff for Tony on the song, and Glenn really, I mean, it's amazing how well he sounds. I mean, In for the Kill is a great opener. Even a song like Heart Like a Wheel, with as basic of a riff as it is, I mean, it's a lot of just like Tony noodling around, but I mean, I think Glenn kind of lifts it. And yeah, I mean, Angry Heart is great. Turn to Stone is a up-pace rocker and really good stuff. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, he was like the fact that he was in like such a deep, dark depression with the drugs at this point, and he still turned in a performance like that is really, it always resonated with me. And I think if any of the albums from that late 80s Sabbath period deserved kind of be revisited live, like given how well Glenn sounds now, I think it would be cool if he and Tony ever were able to get a do-over on this album and kind of perform like a lot of these songs live, because Glenn was only able to make it through like a handful of shows back in 86 before Ray Gillen took over. So yeah, that's my number one.
Sweet.
Okay, very good. I know Glenn always said no matter how much drama he was going through at the time, as soon as he started singing, people forgave him. So I can definitely see that. All right,
Yeah.
next around the clock on my screen is Peter Kerr. Peter, looking forward to hearing your picks. Thanks for joining us.
Rightio. Well, I'm not going to give top three because I'm going to be contrarian. I'm just going to spotlight three because there's so much Glenn Hughes. It's really hard. Look, I've got to, straight off the bat, got to put Burn, Deep Purple, greatest Deep Purple album in my opinion. That's contrarian in itself. I think Glenn Hughes around this era, there's good Glenn and bad Glenn. Now, good Glenn is the voice of God. He's got the most wonderful soul, rich voice. He plays bass. Richie Blackmore said he never practiced. So he just turn up and he'd get in the groove and get in the pocket. And then there's Bad Glenn. Bad Glenn, who's got those addictions, who kind of oversings. He can showboat a little bit. Look at California Jam as an example. But on this album, he's restrained. And I think Glenn Hughes, in his career, he does his best work where he has a foil. David Coverdale, Pat Frowell, Black Country Communion. When he's got a good, strong songwriter and he's got a good foil, that's when the best Glenn comes out. So I'll pick this one because he's bass playing. It's funky, it drives things along, and it's just so loose, and he doesn't rehearse. So he's just got that gift from God. He's just got the talent, and Burn is great. There's some flashes of his singing where he's doing counterpoint on Burn. I think there's another song, What's Going On? There's a few other flashes, but it's when it gets deeper into the Deep Purple discography where a lot of his individuality comes out, and people may say a lot of his excesses come out. So that's the first album that I want to flash. Next one is 1981 Hughes Frol. I will always pitch this up as a lightning in a bottle. This album flopped, but it has grown in stature over many, many years. I think what he had with Pat Frol was just masterly. The songwriting is great. He's picked up a couple of, he goes back to the Trapeze, he does Coast to Coast, but some of the songs that he does here, I Got Your Number, The Look in Your Eye, Muscle and Blood, it's absolutely fantastic. And Pat Frol's guitar playing was just out of this world. And I was watching on YouTube, there was some sort of a reunion. I think it was at Vamps in Vegas about 10 years ago, and you can see that there was definitely some chemistry there. Unfortunately, the drugs got in the way. They weren't motivated enough. They did a 25 tour date tour with Santana. It didn't go on much further, but how would I describe this album? It's got a little bit of new wave. It's got a bit of melodic pop. It's got a bit of funk. But Glenn's singing is just unbelievable. He's going for that upper register. But considering Glenn has always said this is a very heavy coke album, and it's just amazing that they were able to get some artistry out of the circumstances. But, this should have been a huge hit, but maybe it was the wrong time. Hughes Frol, 1981. This is top tier Glenn Hughes. Then we go to the 90s. So the 90s, he was coming out of his addictions. And for a period of time, I think he may have been living in Sweden. And Sweden is a hot pot of melodic rock. They love their AOR. They love their melodic rock. And he backed up, I think he had some of the folk from Europe. And from now on, so I have a shining to this album. It's very melodic rock. He has sort of like, there's some balladry, there's some sort of a little bit of hair metal, but the thing that focuses everyone's attention is his voice. A lot of this album is very much, it's sort of like a born-again Christian album. So he's come out of the drug addiction, and a lot of the lyrics are like, picking up the pieces, walking on water, the lyre. It's sort of like, I don't think he's a religious person, but he's a very spiritual person. And a lot of his writing and a lot of this musical adventure was basically coming out of the alcoholism, coming out of the drug addiction, and investing it in this project. And this kicked off a run of albums where he was basically doing, it appeared like one or two per year. You had Addiction, you had, Feel. Then he was going into funk, First Nuclear, and then he, goes on and on and on. where there was just a plethora of Glenn Hughes material. But that particular album, I always gravitate to it because I like the melodic, and I just love his voice, and that's the focus of Glenn Hughes. I think his bass playing and his vocals, and from now on, is the album that I always go to, and I recommend that.
Sweet.
All right, very good. Let's move on to Bill Schuster. Bill, you're next on my screen. What have you got for us on Top Glenn?
Thank you, Reed. All right. Basically, I think despite his long career and his legendary status amongst niche hard rock fans and himself, I'm pretty sure he considers himself a legend. I think the general music listening public doesn't really know Glenn Hughes. If people just listen to the radio and that's where they get their knowledge from, who is Glenn Hughes to these people? What songs have really made it to rock playlists that have lasted over the years? So it's kind of sad. So my thought was I want to do our little part to get his name back out in the algorithms and maybe bring in a few more people who aren't aware of his history. So I'm going to start off right where David did. I'd like to give you some new choices, but yeah, I've got to go with Medusa. This, you can tell that this was on the Moody Blues Threshold label. Look at that cover. If you're familiar with the Moody Blues albums, those classic 7 from 67 to 72, this would fit right in. You would think it was a Moody Blues cover. We've got the young Glenn at 19. He doesn't look like that anymore, does he?
No.
I think his voice is really, it's a rough diamond on this record, and I totally agree with what David said about the production. I'm not quite sure what John Lodge did either, but it works. It makes this a 1970 hard rock time capsule. It absolutely sounds like 1970 for better and for worse, depending on your taste. You can tell he doesn't have control of his voice yet. He's a bit histrionic sometimes, but it's a lot of fun because he has that passion, that youth, and it sounds completely different. There are times I came in later with Glenn Hughes. I didn't discover this until many years after. So I might not have even recognized this as him if I didn't know going in that this was him singing. And that's kind of cool to see the voice mature over the years like that. His bass playing, he has looked back on it himself apparently and is kind of proud of his bass playing in trapeze. He's made comments about the Deep Purple years in particular being a little too restrained, a little too straightforward. He talked about trapeze being loose, and I kind of tend to agree with that. I can hear that. Mel Galley comes up with some great catchy hooks. It's fairly simplistic, but it does the job just as it's needed to. Obviously all three of these guys, Dave Holland as well, they went on to bigger, more popular bands, but I think it would have been cool if they'd have stuck around longer as a threesome here. They made some pretty killer music together. My number 2, I'm also echoing David. This had to be here. This was my introduction to Glenn Hughes back in 1986. Because, yeah, my radio listening and my other connections did not clue me into Glenn Hughes at this point. I was not deep in the Deep Purple family at that point, so I had no clue who he was. I just knew this was a new Black Sabbath, featuring Tony Iommi album, and I had to have it. So this, to me, unknown vocalist was an absolute amazing surprise. And I've been a fan ever since. And yeah, I agree with what David said. It's just ridiculous what a vocal clinic he puts on here, the control and the smoothness that he has, despite being deep into substance abuse. Yeah, and for anyone who's not aware, we did a show a while back on this particular album on the Contrarians. If anyone wants to dig deeper, I won't belabor the point. David did a nice job covering this, so I'm going to go with my number 1 here. And yeah, David also mentioned this, Black Country Communion, the debut. At this point, you can tell Glenn is having a lot of fun. He really, really enjoyed being in this band. And obviously, we all know the story. Joe Bonamassa, solo career is bigger and blah, blah, blah. That was his focus. Glenn wanted Black Country Communion to be the focus, and I can see why. This was an excellent band. It still is when they get together. Their chemistry is amazing, and Glenn's mature, more controlled voice on here, I think it's better than ever. And I would also say the same about his bass playing. I think he started to get into a lot more of that loose, fun bass playing again. He's brought the funk as needed, but yeah, his bass playing does get lost a lot. Peter mentioned the bass playing, and yeah, his voice is such a focus that people forget what a really good bass player he is. Apparently not good enough to play on 7-Star, but that's another story. Yeah, I wish these guys could have stayed together as a band and had a continual arc rather than this occasional appearance thing whenever Joe can spare the time. But yeah, I'm glad they exist. This is a ridiculous album. My wife really loved this album too. This is the one that made her a Glenn Hughes fan. So what that says, hey, you can make your own judgment there. But yeah, I hope we get plenty more from him. I hope he has many more years with us. He's only 73, so let's see how long that voice holds out.
Sweet.
Okay. Already
Nice
seeing
job.
a little bit of overlap. That's interesting, considering just how many albums there are to choose from. Martin, you're up next on my list. So what have you got for top Glenn?
All right, I'll start with Black Country Communion 2, which I find to be like a pretty adventurous album. It's murky, it's soupy, it's dreamy, it's a little bit like Heavy Black Crows, almost. You don't know what's coming around the corner. It's got some psychedelia, Save Me, big epic 742 Kashmir Wonton song kind of sound on that, but some big thumping sort of blues on here. What I really like about Glenn in this band, and Peter made a great point about this, is like maybe Glenn's solo is almost too much Glenn. You want him part of a team, and when he's part of a team like this team, I swear, I mean, definitely I would say Abacab is probably my favorite drumming album of all time, mainly for sound and for drums, everything. But Jason Bonham is pretty much my favorite rock drummer ever, I would say. I love his performances across these albums. I think the star of the show in this band is Glenn and Jason. More than anything. The grooves are incredible. The bass playing's great, but we got a lyricist in there, of course, as well, and he's singing. And as you guys said, he's mature Glenn maybe has toned it down a little bit, but he's still. I love the idea, Bill, about you saying like he's having fun in this band too, which is kind of cool. But so this one's a little bit. This one's a little bit, I would say. Experimental and surprising and kind of cool. They went that way. Number 2, I'm going with Deep Purple Burn. I could have very closely put Stormbringer or Come Taste the Band here as well, but I agree it's a pretty top flight Deep Purple album. I wouldn't call it my favorite album. Side 1's great. I think it kind of falls off a bit on side 2. I was never a Mistreated fan or an A200 fan, but yeah, love the foil stuff going on here, of course, as well, with David and Glenn. You get some of the classic. This is really his only successful band, which is kind of strange, right? Because he's a totally personable guy. I suppose when he could have been biggest, that's when he had the biggest drug problems, right? So the timing didn't quite work out. And then, of course, it was even bad in the Deep Purple days. But yeah, kind of his only really successful thing, and it was his second, kick at the can kind of thing, right? This wasn't his first rodeo, Deep Purple. So yeah, I think he's great on there. And then for number 1, I went with Black Country Communion 1, the debut. I've played this album a lot. The opening track, Black Country, so frantic. And One Last Soul, again, the drumming is what makes it for me. But the fact that this is a band of brothers, super smart people, Derek Sherinian, Joe Bonamassa, I mean, and they've kind of kept that lineup, even though, yeah, it has been the occasional situation because of the drama. But I on this one, I find the production to be just crushing and just really all business, but really good at the same time. So you get beautiful sounds out of everybody. Glenn's he's in the proper place in the mix. But yeah, Beggar Man with that slinky Hendrix sort of thing going on. And then honorable mentions, I thought California Breed was really good for what it was. It just came and went. And this one, Building the Machine, I thought this was a pretty cool album too. But I like that whole second half of the catalog anyways. So there's some great stuff there as well. Afterglow, of course, Black Country Communion. I totally feel like this band, I as I've said many times, is like this is almost like the closest we came to another Led Zeppelin kind of thing. They were an amazing band. Could have been, should have been huger. Personality everywhere, and just one of the most crushing rhythm sections you can imagine. But yeah, Jason Bonham is just a genius on the drums, that's for sure. On rock, stadium rock drums, basically, right? So there you go. Black Country Communion 2, Burn, Black Country Communion 1.
Nice.
Okay, that is a lot of Black Country Communion. Afterglow is my personal favorite of the Black Country Communion albums, although I'm not including it on my list. I won't do further comment because I don't want to step on Butch's choices. Butch, what have you got for top 3 Glenn?
Okay. Man, I feel like I'm going to the well several times, and David and Bill pretty much hit all the points, but the first one I wanted to start with was Medusa, and it's not the first album that I heard, but it was one I came back to after I, was more into hard rock and metal and knew who Glenn Hughes was, long after I'd heard Seven Star, and which is where I started with Glenn and Phenomenon. And this record, I love it's almost like two halves. There's that kind of like funky thing that Mel with his groove has going on with like Black Cloud. It goes from that folky kind of verse to just that funky kind of hard-hitting chorus, and Glenn on songs like that and Your Love Is All Right, you can kind of hear like the beginnings of that Blue-Eyed Soul kind of Stevie Wonder kind of thing that would be more prominent as the years went on. At the same time, one of the things I love about this record as a metal fan is like, this is 1970, so we're talking about the songs Jury and Medusa. These are like, especially Jury is like Judas Priest before there was, Sad Wings of Destiny was out. I mean, it's so heavy. It's like Glenn is like off the chain on that song. It's almost Rob Halford-esque at times. That's the first time I heard it, I couldn't believe it was 1970. Like, it's unbelievable to me. And so yeah, I mean, this album is one of my favorites that Glenn did, so I couldn't leave it out. The other gentleman covered it really well, so I'll put that one aside for now. I'm kind of going on the fly here because I want to hit, I don't want to hit like every record everyone else hit, because my next one was going to be Seven Star. It's where I started with Glenn. I wasn't that enamored with No Stranger to Love, but when I got the album, like In for the Kill and Turn to Stone and Danger Zone, you get that kind of like metal side of Glenn where he could just get down with that kind of thing. But then, you get the bluesy stuff on there too, like Angry Heart, and his vocals in especially in the In Memory piece on the album. Like, I just think he sounds great on this record. But instead of that one, I'll talk about Come Taste the Band is one of my favorite records with him. My hesitation at first in putting it on here was Glenn was having a lot of drug problems at the time. They had to send him off during recording of the record to get himself together, although he did get most of his bass done. And his vocals on the record, not as noticeable as the two before it, but the ones where they are, which are Getting Tighter and You Keep on Moving, like those are the songs on that record that like give me chills to this day when I hear them. And my wife and I went to see him live several months ago, and the fact that at 73 like he's still singing those songs like crazy is it was like, being in church. Like I raised my hands a couple times. Like it almost brought me to tears that like these songs like that he's still playing. Like it just amazing. But those two songs that I first heard Getting Tighter on that Ultimate Tommy Bolin the Ultimate box set that came out, and that's where I didn't know Bolin at the time. I didn't really know Deep Purple's full history, and so I didn't know Tommy was had been involved with Deep Purple, and I went back and got the record, and I love it. It's still, it's in my top 3 Deep Purple records, and I just think Glenn, like, his bass playing on it is great, and where he does show up, like, singing, I think he's like, when You Keep on Moving, he, is the star of that song. Like, Coverdale's mostly covering the lower bits, and Glenn is doing the more expressive stuff in that song, and it's just really, like, tugs at me emotionally, that song. So that's my other one. And then last, I'm kind of cheating with this. It's a twofer. Peter hit on some of it because the first solo record I heard by Glenn was actually this From Now On, which I love this album. The Only One is phenomenal. I love that song. Into the Void is great. Really good melodic rock album. Avoid some of the I agree with everyone who said that Glenn is better in the confines of a band, because I think his solo records, as much as I like them, it's kind of like with he's one of those singers like Jorn Land that I think sometimes the songwriting gets a little bit lost on the records. There's great songs on all of them, but some of them they kind of like when he's left to his own devices, that they can be a little bit fair to Midland at times, although his voice always can lift like even the most mediocre material. But I love this record. But where I'm cheating is this album is my go-to. If I'm going to listen to solo Glenn Hughes, I always grab this Burning Japan Live. It's got the Cats from Europe as his backing band on here. Mick McKaylee, John Levin, and Ian Haugland. And this album is crazy, crazy good. It covers all facets of his career, from Trapeze to Deep Purple to Hughes Thrall, his solo stuff. All the versions on here are tremendous. The version you Get Tighter on here is great. There's like 4 songs from the From Now On album, which are awesome. Burn sounds great on here. The band is tight as hell. Glenn's voice is, again, like it's amazing to me. Like, this guy is a freak of nature. I wish he deserves a lot more success than he's had. When you go seeing him live, like the people that are there, like, love Glenn. It's like something, like the experience there with people that know his career, and just he has a presence about him too that's it's hard to put into words. Like a happiness emanates from him. You could tell he's glad to be alive and doing what he does, and bringing music to all of us still, and I hope he keeps going. But those are my.
Does he play bass and sing the whole time?
He does. When I saw him, it was he was singing and playing bass. The only time he didn't play bass was for whatever reason, I don't know why, he did a cover of Highway Star. Of it, all the songs he could have picked, he did Highway Star, and at that point, someone else came on and played bass, and he just sang. But it's him with drummer, guitar player, and keyboard player. So it's like just the 4-piece kind of thing. Him ripping on bass and singing his ass off. And honorable mentions, real quick. John Norm's Face the Truth album is awesome. That's an awesome melodic hard rock album. I love Soul Mover. I think is next to From Now On his most complete solo record. I love all the Black Country Communion albums, expecting the next one to kill too. And then the Phenomena record was great. Still the Night, still one of my favorite songs that he ever did. I mean, we could go on and on. I think maybe the only thing I don't really care for in his catalog is the Feel record, which inexplicably is just so mellow after a couple harder ones that came before it. So anyway, those are mine.
Play Me Out as well isn't so hot, right?
Which one?
Play Me Out.
Yeah. I mean,
it's
the first one.
Yeah.
I have it because I'm a completist. It's a little bit on the. I mean, I like funk too, but that one's a little bit. I don't know. I think when you follow a lot of his rock records, and then you go back to that one, it's kind of like takes you by surprise a little bit that it's barely rocks at all. Yeah. But his voice sounds good on it, so
that's a wacky album.
Yeah,
that's way out there.
I saw Glenn last year. Sadly, it kind of bums me out that he's touring doing nothing but Deep Purple material. Martin, speaking to your point earlier that was really his only successful band. And in fact, he's coming back at the end of 2024 doing the same tour where he's doing the 50th anniversary of Burn. But he sings and plays bass the whole time. He does this crazy wah-wah filled funk bass solo. He's starting to use just a few more production tricks in his live performance, a lot of vocal reverb, so that he'll hit those notes still, but he doesn't hold them like he used to. He'll hit it and back off, but there's so much delay and reverb on his voice that it just goes on and on and on. So, you gotta give anybody over 70 years old just a little bit of slack to still be able to perform at all, and to perform at his level is absolutely amazing. Okay. I'm honestly shocked at how much overlap there is, and I kind of wish I weren't going to contribute to it, but I am. I'm going to start off with one of David's picks, and that is 1996's Addiction. I think this is Glenn's best solo album. Interestingly, I think anybody that's deep into Glenn, however that sounded, knows that he does the best with the right collaborators. There's only one Glenn Hughes. You get the same Glenn Hughes on whatever project he's on. He has 3 vocal styles. He has his primary vocal style, he has his over-the-top shrieking vocal style, and he has his soulful balladeer. And he uses all 3 of those styles on every album. It's just a mixture of what he's doing. So really, the flavor of the album depends very heavily on the people that he's collaborating with. Addiction is not just his most personal album. The lyrics on this album are so personal, it's painful to listen to. I know a lot of people don't pay attention to the lyrics, but just look up the lyrics to Death of Me. I don't understand how anybody could sing that live. It's so personal. And he's got this guy, Mark Bonilla, is co-writing songs with him. He also, that's his first album with J.J. Marsh, who goes on to do the rest of the albums in the 90s and early 2000s with him. I think it's a very American sounding album. It's kind of hard to put into words exactly why I think that is. There's something with the production, with the guitar riffs. It's very contemporary to 1996. It's too much to say that it's a grunge sound, but if you saw Glenn Hughes, I mean, this is theoretical, he wasn't on these tours, but if he had toured this album opening for Soundgarden or Smashing Pumpkins or Stone Temple Pilots, it would not have been out of place. He was right in that mid-90s sound. And I think you mostly get that from the guitar and drum production. Because again, Glenn is just Glenn. But look at that picture. He's got short hair. He could be the front man for any grunge band. Coming right out of Seattle at this point. So that's a great album. I'm going to skip over Seventh Star. That was probably not a surprise because of our particular vintage. I'm about the same age as you guys. That was the first Glenn Hughes I was really cognizant of. But I am an enormous fan of the 2 albums he did with Tony Iommi after that. And today I'm picking Fused from 2005. 2005's Fused is not just one of Glenn's best albums, it's one of Tony's best albums. The sound on it is crushing. Tony has never sounded heavier and clearer. He's arguably heavier or just as heavy on Born Again, but of course Born Again sounds like crap. I love it, but it sounds like crap. Fused is amazing. There's this melding of drum and guitar that Tony never achieves on any other album. The sound is so good. And because the guitar is so far forward in the mix, Glenn is constantly pushing air. So he is really belting out because a lower vocal performance would not have made it. The album has enough riffs to do 6 or 7 other albums from a normal band. It's Tony is just vomiting riffs over this album, and he turns in some killer solos. Glenn is, for all of that, surprisingly restrained until we get to, well, there are a couple of songs goes over the top. If you want to know what over the top Glenn sounds like, go to YouTube and just search for Glenn doing a performance of Mistreated. That's all you got to do. He tears that song out for like 7 minutes and spends 3 of it at the very top of his range. It's absolutely insane. But he's a little more restrained on this album, and it ends with one of my favorite Black Sabbath epic tracks. Probably the best since Sign of the Southern Cross, or probably Falling Off the Edge of the World's a better comparison. But they've got this song called I Go Insane that's really long, and it starts off slow and ballady, and Tony's playing acoustic, but then it picks up tempo in the middle, and there are like 6 riffs on this stupid song. There's an entire album side worth of riffs in this one song. And then you combine that with Glenn's lyrics, and the whole thing is just so powerful. I don't understand why those 2 albums, the 1996 DEP Sessions and Fuse, aren't more popular with Sabbath fans, because Sabbath never sounded that good, period. They don't have a single album that sounds as good as Fused. Now, I'm not saying that the songs weren't as good, but the sonics aren't as good. And every time I listen to it, I get angrier about how crappy 13 sounded. And the fact that whoever it was, all of a sudden I'm forgetting his name. Sorry, people, I'm old. The producer on 13 sucked 20 years of progress out of Tony Iommi and made him suck on that album. Where was I? Oh, yes. Finally, one that gets a little less probably notoriety even among our circles, and that's going to be 2015's Voodoo Hill with an album titled Waterfall. So Glenn actually did 3 Voodoo Hill albums. It's his collaboration with an Italian guitarist named Dario Molo. I've never heard the first 2 albums. They're not easy to come by. I don't think they were released in any kind of wide distribution. Dario is mostly known for his collaborations with Glenn Hughes type singers. He's worked with Graham Bonnet. He worked with Tony Martin after Martin left Black Sabbath. And he worked with Glenn Hughes. Dario is a very Ritchie Blackmore influenced guitarist. You can hear that in his playing. I think Glenn does very, very well with that sort of guitarist. So it's got these Deep Purple-esque riffs. But Dario, like most modern heavy metal players, he's flashier. I mean, Ritchie was very, very flashy for the day, but he did a lot of weird stuff like, beating his strings with his guitar cord and rubbing his guitar back and forth on his cabinet and other stuff that wasn't really playing guitar. So in the post-Van Halen world, you got a lot more dexterous flash on the solos. So Dario brings that in, but still within sort of a Deep Purple kind of framework, less keyboards, and produces this great hard rock album. Now on this one, Glenn doesn't play any instruments, he just sings, but Dario said that he did send the songs to Glenn before they had final mixes, so Glenn had input as to some of the productions, and they rearranged some of the songs. They're really good, straight up hard rock, edging into heavy metal. It's a very modern production, but it's not like an over-the-top European, like Yngwie Malmsteen sort of influence thing. It's still right in that good Deep Purple range. It's almost like if you printed out, if you downloaded all of my musical preferences and put it into a computer, something like Voodoo Hill is what's going to spit out. So this album was just designed for me to love. I do have to take a second to discuss Glenn Hughes's lyrics, because Glenn is this wonderful combination of these incredible, painful, personal lyrics talking about his higher power and overcoming hardship, and absolute nonsense. And you get both of those on every album he sings on. And like, as much as I love Afterglow, he's got these stupid couplets like, "We're the last brigade in the motorcade." What does that even mean? That means nothing. Those are just words that rhyme. I don't think he actually cares what the words mean as long as he gets the meter and the rhyming sound right. Or when I sleep in the midnight sun, I taste the cinnamon on the road to Avalon. I don't know. I mean, he's not even on drugs anymore, and he comes up with this stuff. So I don't know what that means. He's an off and on lyricist. That's all I'm saying. Which is one reason why on Addiction you get a whole lot of the self-reflection and very little of the absolute nonsense, which I think really elevates it. For people that don't pay attention to the lyrics, I guess it doesn't really matter. Have you guys heard the Joe Satriani album that Glenn plays bass on and doesn't sing?
No, which one is that?
Ah, I was trying to remember. I can't remember. Probably shouldn't have brought it up. But yes, there is a Joe Satriani album where Glenn is the rhythm section along with Chad Smith from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And he just plays bass and doesn't sing. So he is a talented bass player. Just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, so I'm very surprised there was as much overlap in the picks as there was, and that people were going so far back. I have grown to love most of Glenn's stuff. I'm a big fan of Hughes Thrall, even though I think that album is basically 1981 in a single CD sleeve. That album is very dated as to the sound. One of the coolest covers, though, with the masks on it. Love that cover.
Reed, can I add something just very quickly? Glenn Hughes actually had a #1 hit, folks. What Time Is Love? KLF, UK. KLF were a dance act, and he was promoted as the voice of rock. So he actually had some success in the UK. #1 hit, #1 single.
I had no idea. When was that?
That was in the early 90s. I think 1990. Yeah. Around that era. There you go.
Unfamiliar with them. All right.
Read that Satriani album, sorry, is called it's called What Happens Next. I guess 2018.
There you go. I own it. I should have pulled it out so I could look at it before I mentioned it. But I used to be a big Joe Satriani fan. I rarely listen to instrumental music these days, but it's a good album. And I think it's interesting that he hired Glenn not for his voice, because you don't hear that a lot, that people just hired him to play bass. All right, we still have a few minutes before Martin has to leave us, so let's go around the horn and see if anybody wants to follow up with some final thoughts. David, do you want to add any final thoughts?
I think the one that nobody mentioned was the Dead Daisies. I think that the first album he did, The Holy Ground, I would think was the better of the two. But yeah, I mean, I had seen the Dead Daisies when they first came out with a different singer, and they were good. But when I heard Glenn, I think they kind of took the band to another level. So yeah, there's a lot of good songs on there. There's a song on there called like the title track is really good, and Doug Aldrich's guitar playing on that album is really good. And yeah, that's one of the ones from the last few years that I listen to quite often.
Yes. And Glenn always lists Humble Pie as a huge influence. And of course, they've got the cover of 30 Days in the Hole. So It's an album I like as well. I did see that tour live, and it was almost entirely Glenn Hughes material with a couple of Dead Daisy songs thrown in. So, which may be one reason why Glenn's not with the band anymore. He was project. Peter, last thoughts?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I don't know if folk are aware, but he actually laid down some disco tracks with Casablanca Records in the late 70s. So if that ever got the time of day and got released, he may have been on a different trajectory with his career. I've always thought that he's got a very soul Stevie Wonder voice, and maybe heavy metal and hard rock he's like maybe a square peg in a round hole. Maybe soul music, R&B was the career for him. Like, look at Michael Bolton. He originally was a hard rock singer, shifted genres, became a superstar. Could that happen for Glenn Hughes? Because he sort of got drawn into the hard rock, drawn into the heavy metal. Was he totally comfortable? Maybe that's another what if, and that's another episode. But if he went down that R&B and soul, because he's got that wonderful, natural, God-given voice, he may have been a superstar. That's my final thought.
It's an interesting thought, although it's kind of hard to wash off that heavy metal stink once it's on you. Bill Schuster, any final thoughts?
I don't remember the name of it, but I would like to mention his Christmas album. Yes,
Oh, yes.
Glenn has a Christmas album, and it is very much in his style. Love it or hate it. I played it quite a bit a few years back. I haven't touched it in recent years because I kind of forgot about it until just now. But now I'm going to have to go put it back in the rotation again just to see if it's as fun as I remember. And I just want to say that, frankly, after your entertaining, intelligent performance there, Reed, I don't think the rest of us needed to even show up. That was outstanding. Bravo.
Well, thank you. Martin, last thoughts?
Not particularly. I have a question though for you and Butch. What is his bass playing like right now? I mean, is he a virtuoso? Licks? Is it Sixth Sense? Is it what kind of a bass player is he?
He's real. I mean, he's not like so all over the bass like I don't know. I'm trying to think like Alan Woody or someone like that. That like their hand is moving so quickly. But I mean, what he's playing is like it does sometimes make my kind of take my breath away that he's playing what he's playing while he's singing. But he's always in the pocket and playing for the song. He's not so totally over the top, but his playing is definitely like it's not like a simpleton kind of thing. Like he's definitely like going for it. I mean, that whole band is just that he has is just like they just let it out there, man.
Yeah.
How about his tone and intonation and stuff? And what does he sound like?
It's real. Well, I mean, I think they have a real 70s vibe going. Yeah. I don't know what you think, Reed.
Yeah, he's got that very classic Fender Precision bass sound. It's just very low end, heavy. Like I said, when he's the focus, he uses a lot of wah, which honestly has always kind of annoyed me when bass players use wah pedals. Mm-hmm. He does this thing where he does a lot of fills, but when he's singing, Glenn is not somebody who holds one pitch, right? He's up and down and all over it. So he will either hold a note and then play a fill on the bass, or he'll hold a note on the bass and then basically sing a fill with his voice. So there's always something moving in his performance. It is a little disorienting, but I agree. The fact that he keeps up with that kind of two brains, because it's like having it's like being a drummer, right? Having a second set of brains in your hands to keep two different rhythms. I think it's pretty interesting. All right, Butch, last thoughts?
My last thought, really, I mean, it's interesting to me with all the material that Glenn has, and he's put out a few odds and ends records, that the one thing that's never turned up officially yet is the collaboration he did with Greg Giuffria. There's a song called Walking Across the Sun that has yet, as far as I know, to see an official release. And so Glenn and Greg, if you're watching this, let's get that out, because I'm a big fan of both, and it'd be cool to have a nice version of that that's not like on an old tape that someone mailed me. But yeah, I mean, I can't really add to what everyone else has already said. I mean, he's a great artist, and like I said, seeing him live I don't know, the only other vocal performance I remember seeing live that took my breath away quite as much was seeing Tom Jones 5 or 6 years ago. Both guys like nearly brought me to tears a couple times just from how good they were as singers.
Yeah. And I will say, when I saw the Dead Daisies, they did Mistreated in the middle of the set. And as I mentioned earlier, he is so over the top on that song, and he sings it so high for so long, that would only be a show closer for most people, because you'd be trashed at the end of that. He did it in the middle of the set and then played another hour of music after that, which I don't understand how that's physically possible, let alone possible for a guy of his age. So ultimate respect for that man's voice. All right. I think we've covered a lot of Glenn here. I hope everybody gets some value out of this. If you really want a deep dive, Peter Kerr and I did an examination of the Hughes Turner project, which is another one that I really love, although I didn't want to bring it up on this. And there will be lots more Contrarians videos coming right up. Check out our Patreon. It's a great community. And we'll see you very soon in another video. Thanks a lot, guys. I was looking forward to this.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
See ya.
See you guys.
Awesome. Bye now.